Y'all need any of this? Y'all need some? What? Trillion? Yeah. You've been hanging out with Naaman the Syrian. Hey, feels good to be in worship today, doesn't it? Feels good to be in God's house today. Of course, we appreciate y'all being here, and we're very aware of the situation. And personally, I kind of struggle with should we worship today. There are many churches in our area that are not, and it looks we will not have Wednesday night services this week, or no Wednesday night activities this Wednesday night or the following Wednesday night for spring break, and it's looking like we may be asked to not have services next Sunday. And so we're actually, as I speak, this is our first Facebook Live. It's actually streaming, so hello world out there. And we're on Facebook Live, and we got that wired up today. And so we may be looking at online options for next week as we just see how this situation progresses. But we are here at Mulder, we're all about connecting with God, growing in Christ, and serving others. And so part of connecting with God is that we come together and we connect with each other, and we're encouraged in a time of crisis and a time where there's so much panic and fear and confusion in the world. But we're also here to serve others and to serve our neighbors. And sometimes being a good neighbor means cooperating in events that are taking place across our community in helping to combat what is a threat. And we see what's happening in Europe, and there's different ideas on how serious the threat is among different people. We see there definitely are people who are dying in Europe, and that this is whenever there's fear, there's always a certain cynicism to what we hear, but it's also a beautiful thing to see communities come together to work to fight against something that's not against each other. You know, it's kind of what's been going on. So we'll update as the week unfolds, as decisions are made about what will happen next Sunday. But I'm grateful to Willie McDonald. Willie is our Director of Digital Ministry, and he's got us hooked up to do Facebook Live today, and we'll see how we do it, because not everyone's on Facebook, and so how are we going to do that next Sunday? So, Willie, we just appreciate Willie. He's outstanding, does an outstanding job. Yeah. Willie was giving himself a hand back there. Also, for those who are homebound and those who are in the highest at-risk categories, we've had some people in our church to volunteer to go to the grocery store for you if you don't feel comfortable going to the grocery store. And so that's a big concern in our church family. And also for those families who are living paycheck to paycheck, they don't have anything saved for the idea that there's 2 or 3 weeks without work, or maybe even without a job, those who are making an hourly wage. We've got a James 127 fund that we're going to use, we want to use to help when there's needs like that. And so if there's needs in our church family that we hear about where someone doesn't have a job, or they've lost a job and because of this, and there's a need, we want to know about that, okay? So those are 2 ways that we want to help in this time. So, on his first Sunday sermon, or I guess Saturday, Sabbath day for a Jewish person, on his first sermon, Jesus Christ, in the synagogue in Nazareth, he opened up the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, and he read a passage that we know we would look at as being from Isaiah chapter 61, a passage about a servant who God would send to save his people, to preach good news, to provide healing, to set the oppressed free, and all these things. Jesus read from this scroll, and then he closed it, and he said, "Today this reading is fulfilled in your hearing." And all of those in the synagogue, they looked around at each other, and they said, "Wow, such eloquent words. Is this Joseph's son, the carpenter, the little boy who's grown up here? Look who he's become. And perhaps this could be our deliverer. This could be our Messiah right here in our hometown of Nazareth." And then Jesus said this in Luke chapter 4, verse 24, "Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown." And he used 2 examples to illustrate his point. 2 stories from the days of the kings. One was of the prophet Elijah, who in a time of great famine under the reign of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, went to a widow in Zarephath who was about to starve to death, she and her family. and Elijah, through a miraculous provision, provided for this widow, even though she was a foreigner. And then Jesus used this example. He spoke in verse 27. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed or was recorded as being cleansed in the days of Elisha, the successor of Elijah, only Naaman the Syrian. Now, whatever he said there in referring to these two examples, reading with our modern ears and look with our own eyes, we might not get it, but his audience got it. And whatever he said so enraged them and turned them from being, oh, this is Joseph's boy, we're so proud of him, to being an angry mob ready to throw him off a cliff. And it says Jesus escaped through the crowd, so he survived the mob scene that he created. Whatever he said by referring to Naaman and the widow of Zarephath was so controversial that it turned the tables on him. He was referring to two outsiders, two foreigners who received the grace of God in times of famine and national turmoil. What Jesus was saying is that this is the way that it's going to work in this kingdom that I'm bringing. That in God's kingdom, the outsiders will become the insiders. Now, the story of Naaman goes like this. Naaman, we're told in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1, introduced the story. We're told that Naaman was the commander of the armies of the king of Aram. Jesus referred to him as Naaman the Syrian. Syria, Aram, they're the same country. Naaman was a great man in the sight of his master. He was highly regarded. He had brought about victories for the armies of Aram, and perhaps some of those victories were against Israel. Aram was a neighboring country. They were not a friend of Israel. They had disputed territories that they fought over time and time again. So it's ironic that Naaman would be one that's described as one through whom the Lord had given victory. And so we're told all these wonderful things about him. But there's one caveat. This great commander, this great general, this man who's highly regarded, had leprosy. He had this one issue. I'm not sick, okay? That's allergies. Sometimes, like, I've been thinking about this, like, we're so paranoid. Like, you know, on Bugs Bunny cartoons, like when someone coughs in the audience, they go, poof. You know, that's kind of like we are. We're so paranoid. But I'm not sick. It's allergies. I promise, okay? And if you were up here preaching 3 times a day, you would do that too. So, okay, back to this. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. He had a wasting skin disease, a disease that caused nerve damage to his skin that would result in disfigurement and even being disabled and unable to get around as a result of his experience of this. Like, it would disease your hands and feet, and you would be able to damage. You couldn't feel pain. So he has this debilitating disease. Well, a surprising recommendation for healing comes from an unlikely place. A slave girl who serves Naaman's wife, who is from Israel. And she sees her master and what he is experiencing. And she said, oh, if he could only see the prophet in Samaria, which is the capital of Israel. If only he could see this great prophet, he could cure him. And so Naaman thinks, what do I have to lose? He goes to the king of Aram, who sends him to the king of Israel. And so Naaman winds up at Elisha's house. And sent with him is a great deal of loot, okay? A lot of wealth. He carries with him, it says, 10 talents of silver, which is the equivalent of 750 pounds of silver. He carries with him 600 shekels of gold, which was 600 times the annual wage of the average laborer, and 10 sets of clothing. It said that what he carried with him was the buying power equivalent of what would be $750 million today, okay? So Naaman pulls up at the little shack that is Elisha's house, and he's got all this wealth. And Elisha doesn't even come out to meet him. He says, hey, if you want to be cleansed, go down to the river Jordan and dip 7 times, and you'll be cleansed. And so Naaman, he takes offense at this request. He doesn't even come out to greet him. Elisha doesn't even come out to greet him to tell him to dip in the river 7 times. Well, we've got rivers in Damascus, rivers in Aram, rivers in Syria. Why can't I dip there? Okay? And so he goes off in a rage. But his servants, his slaves, ask him to reconsider this. Just reconsider. It wasn't like he asked you to do some hard thing. He asked you to do this easy thing, so why don't you do it? So Naaman goes to the river, he dips 7 times, and he is cleansed. He is healed. And in that moment, not only is he physically healed, he is changed. He is changed. And he says in verse 15 that he goes back, he takes his caravan, his entourage, and they go back to the humble abode of Elisha. And he stands before him and he says, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. I mean, before, as far as we know, Naaman believed in Israel's God. Every country had a God. I mean, that was your national God. But this experience, it's changed him. And he comes back to Elisha and he says, now I know that there's, not only is this God real, but that there is no other God. There's no other God in all the world except in Israel. And the overflow of his heart, and in truly the expectation perhaps of what was done in that day when a prophet performed a service for you, is that he wants to pay him. Accept a gift. I want to give you something. Please accept a gift from your servant. I brought this cool $750 million with me. It's just waiting to go to somebody. And Elisha says, what all of you would say, no thanks. Yeah, yeah. He says, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. Now, Elisha would have been perfectly within his rights to receive it. It wouldn't have been wrong for him to receive it. We see later that people offered things to those who follow Jesus. Paul says it's not wrong for you to accept them. But even though Naaman urges him, he refused. And perhaps what is another testament to Naaman's character and how he's been changed and transformed by the grace of God is that this would be an insult. That you won't take what I'm offering you, what I will give you, what I will pay you. But he doesn't get angry, okay? That Elisha won't accept it. It's an interesting exchange that sort of turns worldly power on its head. Here is the one with all the wealth, with all the means, who comes in with his entourage, Naaman, comes to a humble abode of Elisha the prophet. And Elisha won't receive it, okay? First of all, he sends him away to the river, and then he won't receive the abundance of wealth that he offers him. Maybe there's a hint here about where true power lies. We're distracted by all the means and the fancy things of the world, but the true power lies in the Lord, Elisha says, whom I serve. So I bet that Elisha, who just let this $750 million walk away, I bet that he had no reservations about this. He had no second thoughts. I mean, his life was so secure in the grace of God and what God had given him and in God's provision that he just had, his life wasn't about that for him, that he had no second thoughts. Would you? If it had been you. And I think we maybe all have moments where there's something wonderful has happened and we say, I just want to do this for free. I just want to give away. I want to make this sacrifice because my life has been touched and I've been changed by the grace of God. We have those moments like that. But then sometimes when things get hard, we have 2 or 3 weeks and there's uncertainty about where our income is going to come from, and we think, what was I doing? Would you have second thoughts? Well, there's one among Elisha's company who does. And his name is Gehazi. And he is, we're told, the servant of Elisha. Now, servant is not the same term here as would mean for Naaman's servants or slaves. Gehazi would have been the apprentice to Elisha. He was the prophet in training, if you will. Elisha had been the apprentice or the prophet in training to Elijah. And Gehazi is Elisha's apprentice. And Gehazi, we discover he's a little more shrewd than Elisha, okay? He starts to think about all that could have been done with that money that just walked away, all the good that could do. I mean, after all, that amount of wealth that Naaman brought from Aram, it was probably, scholars say, it was probably more wealth than existed in the entire kingdom of Israel. It was a very rough time financially for them. They had been under very poor leadership for generations. And here Aram was prospering. And so all of that wealth is going to go back to Aram. It's going to go back to this idolatrous nation instead of being here with us. Think about all the good that could be done with that. So you're just going to let it walk away? And so Gehazi reasons to himself. It says in verse 19, after Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, maybe that's where his problem, talking to himself, he says, my master was too easy on Naaman. He was too easy. Now, that's probably Naaman's offense at what he was asked to do. He's just too easy. Go dip in the Jordan River and be healed. And for those of us who are insiders, when we see the grace of God being extended, and we often think it's just too easy on those outsiders. God's just too easy on them. And that was kind of Jonah's complaint when God spared the Ninevites instead of wiping them out like the terrible idolaters that Jonah knew that they were when they repented. He's too easy on him. I mean, this foreigner come here, doesn't appreciate our culture, has served our enemy. So he's been too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, this foreigner, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. I'm not going to let this opportunity pass by because it doesn't come except once in a lifetime. And so here's what he does. Gehazi hurried after Naaman. And when Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from the chariot to meet him. Is everything all right? He asked, everything okay? Gehazi, I mean, here you are, come running up toward me. Everything's all right, yeah. My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets just came to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. He lies. And of course, Naaman, who is still overflowing from the experience that he's had. Oh, 1 talent. Take 2 talents, said Naaman. Now, this is just a little bit he's asked for. I mean, maybe this is only a few million out of the 750 million worth of gold and silver and clothing that he has with him. But still a significant amount. But so Gehazi says, oh, no, that's not necessary. But he urged Gehazi to accept him, and he accepted him. And it says he tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing, and he gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. Now, this is equivalent of 150 pounds of gold, so it's too much, or silver, so it's too much for Gehazi to carry, so his own. So some of Naaman's company goes with him to go back to where they're staying. So when Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. Very quietly. He sent the man away and they left. And inside the house, there's Elisha. When he went and stood before his master, Elisha asked him, where have you been, Gehazi? Your servant didn't go anywhere, Gehazi answered. He lied again. And just like one lie often leads to another and to another and to another. Elisha's on to something, okay? Where'd that Escalade come from? That's out there in front of our hut. You know, where did that come from? Okay, where'd you get one of those, what do they call them, the dromedary camels? You know, one of those super duper one hump camels that can like go really fast. And where'd you get that super camel? You know, where did you get the money to buy a dromedary Okay, where did you get that? Something's going on here. And Gehazi should know better, okay? I mean, he's seen Elisha call down curses on people and bears came out of the woods, and just kind of all crazy he should have known better. But Elisha knows. He said to him, was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes or olive groves and vineyards or flocks and herds and male and female slaves? He's on to it. But look at what he describes here. What is this that he, go back to verse 26. What is this he describes here? Taking money, accepting clothes, or olive groves, or vineyards, or flocks and herds, or male and female slaves. What kind of lifestyle is he describing there? Whose lifestyle is he describing? Slaves, flocks, herds. He's describing Naaman's lifestyle. And so we have this incredible irony. We have Naaman, the man with all the wealth in the world, all of the means of power available to him. But there's this one thing he doesn't have that only the God of Israel can give to him through Elisha, the healing of his debilitating disease. And here's Gehazi, this man who has lived the simple life with Elisha, following him around. A man who was raised under the teaching of the law of the Lord. The man who had seen Elisha work miracles. He'd seen all the incredible things God had done. But he's envious, he's jealous, he's lustful for what Naaman has. And what Naaman has, he gets. And not just some of the loot. Naaman's leprosy, Elisha says, Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever. And then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous. It had become white as snow. Actually, in the Hebrew, the word white is not there. It just says that it became as snow, which doesn't just imply color, but a flaking of the skin that was common with that kind of disease, Hansen's disease or leprosy as we would know it from the Bible. And so there was this really a shocking irony that the outsider, the man of the world, the general of the foreign army of Israel's enemy, receives the grace of God and is transformed, healed, changed. And literally the right-hand man of the prophet, the apprentice of the prophet, the insider of insiders, that he has not experienced the grace of God, that he is on the outside looking in. And so here's the twist, in a shocking irony for those who would have read this, and this was what Jesus was hinting at when he referenced this story in his sermon in Nazareth. That in God's kingdom, the outsiders become the insiders. And the insiders become the outsiders. Just because you're close to the right people, just because you got the right connections, doesn't mean you've experienced the grace of God. And it could be that the Naamans of the world are getting in before you, the foreigners, the pagans, those who are the outsiders. See, Jesus, this is what he was described when he said in Matthew chapter 20, verse 16, the last will be first, and the first will be last. Now, Naaman was someone who was first. He was a powerful man in his nation, very wealthy. But he became last as a result of his leprosy and his willingness to humble himself to be obedient to what the prophet said, to wash and be cleansed in the Jordan River. So he was one who was first who became last in order to become first again in a different way. And Gehazi was one who was, stay back, was one who was first who became last. I think this is a lesson about sin. Naaman's leprosy represents sin. Leprosy in that day in ancient Mesopotamia, it represented a curse from the gods. It was believed that if you got leprosy, it was a sign that God was displeased with you. In the laws of the Old Testament, those who had leprosy, they had to be quarantined. They were treated like they were unclean, just like sin was to be quarantined and kept away from the community. So it was the same way with those who were sick in this way, those who had this disease, because they understood it to be contagious. And perhaps it was. So it's a lesson about sin, but it's also a lesson about grace. And I want you to notice the role of money in this story. You can't escape it. I mean, it's definitely plays a role, especially in Gehazi's part of the story. When you look at these two, when you look at Naaman and Gehazi, there's a very different approach to wealth. Naaman is thinking about what he's got, okay? Not in terms of material wealth anymore. Maybe he was before, but not anymore. Now he's thinking about what he's received in terms of the grace of God that has healed him and saved his life. He's willing to give all of that away because of his experience. Gehazi, on the other hand, though he doesn't have all the wealth, that's what he wants. That's what he's spending his life pursuing. That's what he's lusting after. Naaman's thinking about what he's got. He has a mindset of abundance, but yet he's the most generous. Gehazi is thinking about what he doesn't have, and he's lying and cheating to try to get more. It's an interesting principle. And I think sometimes we see this in our own lives. If you've ever been in a place where you received something, maybe it was a generous amount of money, maybe it was a healing, your life was spared, you thought you might die, and all of a sudden you got your life back, or there was some disease that you were facing and you were healed or cured. And there was just this sense of where I'm going to be so generous now. Well, I've got this and I wasn't expecting this, or I've got this more, and I'm going to be so generous. And we have those we tell ourselves that. But then as time passes, we start to take that for granted. And we cling on to it a little tighter. And we think about what we don't have. It's really a surprising principle, but I've discovered that it's true. It's that those who give the most aren't the richest. They are the most grateful. They are those who are the most grateful for what they have received. We have some wonderful people. We have some Naamans in our church. Those who give generously, those who are people of means, whose lives have been changed. But it would surprise you. Some of the strongest givers are not the richest. They're not the wealthiest. And in my experience as a pastor, sometimes those people are, as in experiences in church, in the church, where you look, there's this people there, oh, what do they do? What do they say? Can we do this or not? And there's been other members of people that totally would be unexpected who could give more, were giving more. Those who give the most aren't the richest. It's those whose hearts have been changed by the grace of God and are grateful for what they've received. So, let me ask you this question. Does Naaman's leprosy cling to you? Are you obsessed with worldly power? You're focused on worldly power, wealth, means, all those things you could do if you had a little bit more? It doesn't mean that you don't give. You can have Naaman's leprosy and give. But there's an expectation. I give depending upon what I expect in return. And if you give with that kind of spirit, are you really giving? It's more of a commercial transaction. What I've discovered is those who have the heart of the changed Naaman, it's not a matter of, oh, look how much I'm giving, but it's how much I'm not giving. Based on what I've received, oh, I could be giving so much more. And I should be, because of what God has done for me. I hear conversations like that all the time from people who are the most generous. I give so much, but I wish I could do so much more. Well, they don't even say that. They don't even say the first part. They don't even see themselves as giving a lot. For Naaman, everything is changed by his encounter with God. So as a result, he wants every part of his life, everything that he does is a concern to him and how it reflects on his relationship with God. He says, when I go into the temple of Rimmon, which is the god of my master, the king of Aram, and he's going to be right at my side, and he's going to be leaning on me, and so I'm going to have to bow in this temple because he bows down, he's leaning on me. May the Lord see this and know that my heart belongs to the Lord. Even though I have to bow, the Lord forgive me for this. He's concerned about every aspect of his life on how it reflects in his relationship with the God who's changed his life. Well, if you're like Gehazi, I believe there's hope. Gehazi receives, the story ends abruptly there, and it's kind of like what happens to Gehazi. He's covered with leprosy, and it says it will cling to your family for generations. I mean, definitely very sad ending, but I believe that there's hope for the Gehazis of the world. And the reason for this is because Gehazi reappears. He reappears 3 chapters later. In 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 4, it says, this is the king of Israel, was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and had said, tell me about all the great things Elisha has done. He asked Gehazi about all that Elisha had done. And some scholars think that this conversation actually took place before the experience with Naaman, because, of course, Gehazi had leprosy, and it was going to cling to him forever. But I wonder if it's not chronological, that it is after that experience, because there's no way that the king of Israel would allow Gehazi into his presence if he was covered with leprosy, this infectious disease that required you to be quarantined if you had it. Perhaps Gehazi was healed, that his mindset shifted, perhaps partly as a result of this leprosy clinging to his body, that he got to a place to where his mindset changed from one of lack to one of abundance. And that he experienced that grace of God, that healing power of God for himself. Because here's the truth. Maybe this is what I hope Gehazi discovered. Is that really, when it comes right down to it, we are all outsiders. We are all outsiders, and the grace of God is not something to be taken for granted. We are all on the outside, and what God has done for us is incredible. The price he has paid so that we can be insiders. There's no length that he will not go to make us an insider. And when we think about the cost that was paid in the life of Jesus being given for you, it's enough to make us change how we think about everything that we have and the value of it. When I realize that is the cost of what was paid for me to be saved of my sins, to be cleansed from my leprosy, what won't I give or be willing to give when the greatest price of all has been paid for me? So here's what I wonder in this time of national crisis, as a disease from another country has infected our nation and has caused great widespread fear, and we, in a time of unprecedented prosperity, we're the most powerful nation in the world, and more so than ever have been, and we are locked down because of fear of a sickness, of a virus. I wonder if this is just a sign to us, a reminder to us of our true condition that we really would rather not see, that our lives are so fragile, that we are mortal, and that unless someone acts to save us, we are hopelessly lost forever. Are you an insider today? I pray you are. Don't be envious of the outsiders. Don't lust after what they've got. What they have can't compare to the value of what you've been given. Are you an outsider? Well, if you are, wash and be cleansed. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Because the one who has made all and created all, he has given his life for you so that you can be healed. And not of just sickness that affects the body, but of that of which is the source of death itself. The wages of sin is death, to heal us from the power of sin. Wash and be cleansed. I'm going to lead us in a time of prayer.